I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Matewan.
Before we get into this week's film, next week we're going to be watching Blood and Black Lace, the Mario Bava film. There's a new Gialla, however you
Jalo.
say it in Italian, Gialla horror collection on Criterion. And since it is the season of spooky, since October is just around the corner, just a couple of days from now, it seems like a very good fit. I've seen Gialla films before, but I haven't seen anything by Mario Bava, and you haven't seen anything by Mario Bava either, have you?
No, I have not.
So this is
Not
gonna
yet.
be a new experience for both of us. So I'm excited. It looks fun.
Yep, I love Jalo movies. They're amazing. They're a lot of fun to watch, I think.
But this week,
Hmm.
inspired by the early death of James Earl Jones
Yeah,
at a
he was
young
just a kid.
93, he
He
was
was just a
just a
kid.
kid.
Can't believe it.
Gone too soon. Thoughts and prayers.
Hmm.
But due to his demise, we decided to pick a film with a strong James Earl Jones
With him in it.
experience with him in
Yeah,
it. And
and
we
he's in
picked,
it.
I feel like I can never say the name of this film right. Is it pronounced Matewan? Matewan? They say it a
Made
bunch in the movie, but
it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. How do you say it?
Matewan?
Matewan?
I
It's
can look
some
it up.
city. Is it a real city? It's probably a real city in West
It's
Virginia.
based off a real event that happened.
Okay,
Like this is
so it's a
based off
real.
a real thing that happened called like the Battle of Matewan.
Okay, that's
Or the
wild.
Matewan massacre. Yeah, like it was a real thing. Like the last scene that actually happened. Like
God
the mayor
damn.
got killed and like they killed like a bunch of the people from like the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. I'm assuming that like characters aren't necessarily real.
Right.
Like I'm sure um the Chris Cooper character isn't necessarily like a real character, but I think like the sheriff is real. Like the police chief character is like real and the mayor is real and yeah.
Let me ask, going into this movie, I was skeptical. I'd never seen a John Sayles movie before, but I don't know why I didn't think I would like this movie, but there was just something in my head that I just wasn't very excited about this experience. And since we didn't record last weekend, I pushed watching this film until pretty late in the week because I just wasn't in the mood. I didn't have the vibes of this movie, and I didn't really know what it was about. But I regret not seeing it sooner because this film is actually way better
It's
than yeah,
fantastic.
it's so
It's like
good.
it's a beautiful film.
Oh my God, it's so green. Never seen a movie
Yeah,
that's so green.
this movie is shot by Haskell Wexler, who shot like maybe
Mhm.
some of my favorite movies of all time. Like well, he shot Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf,
Yep.
Days of Heaven. He shot, which is I've not seen that movie, but I understand that is very beautiful. I think he shot The Conversation.
Yep. The Conversation, One Flew
Um,
Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Faces.
yeah, yeah, Faces. I got at the library. I got the Criterion Blu-ray, and I watched the like behind the scenes featurette that was like produced by Criterion in 2019. And they interviewed like a bunch of like they interviewed sales and a bunch of actors and producers, and a lot of them would went on and on about how great Wexler was to work with and how just incredibly talented and awesome he is, and it shows in the movie. Like the movie looks incredible. And I think you pretty much have to attribute that to Wexler,
Yeah.
pretty much. And I think like you can attribute like the great performances and the writing from Sales, for the most part.
I don't know if there has ever been a character that has made my skin crawl more
Oh yeah, the
than the incredibly evil company man and his
he's the guy from the
associate.
it's the guy from Kevin Teague is the actor. I think it's the guy that plays yeah, the main guy from the detective company, right? The Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. Is that who
Yeah.
you're referring to?
Hmm.
Yeah, that guy. And they pointed out in the featurette too, like they he's so scary because he's always smiling all the time. He's always got a grin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the best antagonists. He's great in Roadhouse too. That actor. He plays a
Hmm.
good guy though. He plays the guy who owns the bar. But yeah, he's great.
I mean, my God, there's something about the way he smiles. Like, there's something about like this darkness under his everything he does. Like, the
Yeah.
nicer he is, just like the more you hate him and just revile
Yeah.
him and every fucking thing he does.
He- I keep going back to the featurette, but Sales made a very funny said a very funny story where people said like, oh, you made like the strike breakers basically, right? Like the
Yeah.
detective the guys from the detective agency. You made them look like a little too evil, maybe like cartoonishly evil. And Sales was like, well, look, these are guys, and he brought up like I guess like a real historical event. Like these are guys that commandeered like a shipment of milk to like poor children of like striking workers and replace them and like put like kerosene or something
Oh
inside of
my
it.
God.
So Sale's like, I feel like I let them off easily. Like I feel like they look better than they actually were in real life. And he is probably right. They probably
Oh yeah.
were. Like these strike breakers are like maybe some of the most down low evil people like in all of like American history.
I mean, they are just some of the cruelest human beings of all time. And I'm thinking about, because this is a big part of the film, I also watched Deep Cover this week, which we'll talk on the
One of the best movies.
so good. I actually have two copies on Blu-ray for some reason. I think I accidentally bought a second copy, not
That's
realizing,
crazy.
but they're great. I'm glad I love it. And I love the movie. And there's this line near the very end of the movie where Lawrence Fishburne says, there is no black, there is no white, there's no
Yeah.
Asian, there's no Mexican. There's only the rich and there is only the poor. And
Yeah, that's pretty much yeah. That's the
that's
Joe Keenahan speech that he gives like toward the
mhm.
beginning of the movie at the meeting, right? Like which is a
Yep.
great little speech where he's like, there's two kinds of people in the world. And it's a great speech. He's like, there's two kinds of people. There's those who work, there's those who don't. We work, and they don't. And that pretty much is all you need to know about the enemy. It's like there you go, like it that pretty much sums up and Americans struggle with that today. Like the semblance of like a class consciousness and sort of realizing that those who don't work, as he calls them, want us to sort of be divided up, among issues like race and religion and things like that. And these things like they do have like their subtleties, right, in terms of like how your subjective experience is going to be, in the United States. And it's important to point out and recognize ultimately. But also, it's important to recognize like, what we have in common. They come together, right? In that way. And, I love like too, you have like the Alabama scabs
Hmm.
or whatever. And you also have like the Italian immigrants too, which is like a very interesting detail as well, like Italian immigrants there. And they're in like kind of like this beautiful West Virginia environment. It's just like out there in the middle of like the woods, basically, like the whole time. You were talking less like what a couple of weeks ago about like movies to watch like in class or whatever, like at
Hmm.
school. Like this is really like the kind of movie that they should play for like juniors and seniors in high school. Like if we're really like being serious here, and you I think you could, like the only thing that would maybe prevent it is maybe like the language, but there's no like sex or nudity in it. And it gets pretty violent, but only until like the very end.
I mean, even the violence isn't, I mean, it's horrific and sad,
Yeah,
but it's not like there's very little blood. It's not very
there's like
visually.
squibs. There's like
Yeah.
some nicely placed squibs that make it look real, but it's not, there's no gore.
No, not at all. But I think the reason they would never play this in a school, and perhaps you
Yeah.
don't recall this, but
Right.
schools are extremely capitalistic and
Yeah, they don't want yeah,
classist,
exactly. I'm just saying that like I'm saying ideally in an ideal world,
ideally.
that we would yeah, because like America just has such a violent like labor history, and it's just not something that yeah, like schools are interested in like teaching or recalling, because yeah, like you said, like schools are basically like philanthropic like institutions, right? They're like all about kind of this sort of you know uh bootstraps, you know capitalism philanthropic thing of where it's you against everyone kind of thing. And go to school, do your grades, and then get a job, and then just like never ask any questions or ask for anything more is pretty much like the idea. um that's very, I know it's very cynical of me, but it's pretty, it's not, I don't think it's too far off.
I mean, speaking as someone who has worked in schools for the last 10 years, it is amazing how little is given, if any, thought at all is given to this fundamental part of America, which is the the unionization of the United States, particularly in the 19, right, the 10s,
Mhm.
20s, and 30s during the Great Depression,
Yeah.
and just how they were fucking destroyed,
Destroyed. Like fucking like
slaughtered.
yeah. We they always talk about like the wars or whatever, right? Like in history classes, you got the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, there was, maybe like a
Spanish
war here
America.
and there, and then there was like World War I. That was the next big
Mhm.
one. It's like, well, I mean, that was a war, right? The war against the working class of the United
Yeah.
States, right? As they were being crushed, like them being like completely crushed, and their sacrifices did lead to ostensibly like better like unions winning out in some cases. Shorter working weeks, shorter working hours, child labor laws, right? Like like so like these things like they do happen, but they don't happen just like out of no it doesn't they don't happen because the benefactors or the factory owners are suddenly benevolent and they're like, ah, yes, like I've had a vision and I realized that what we did was wrong. No, it's like it happens after decades and decades of like death and suffering that like that's what results in these like wins. And it continues to this day, which is why it's a very important history to teach. And again, it's for those in charge, it's not really a history that they're all interested in teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the reason that they don't teach it is it's still very much a part of the world we live in today. I mean, the Jeffrey Bezos and the Bill Gates and the
Yeah,
Mark
it
Zuckerbergs of the
continues.
world, they continue to prey upon the poor and the weak. And, in modern America, it's these contract workers that you legally don't have to pay a minimum wage because for some reason, if you work on contract, you're not a real human being. And so you can just pay them whatever the fuck you want. And they have to use all of their own resources. And it's this predatory practice where these people get stuck in these jobs because they don't know what else to do, and then they can't ever find another job because they're constantly just trying to make enough money. Just like here, which was something
Yeah.
that was not just common in coal miners, but in a lot of different industries. I think of the people who went out to California during the Great Depression, right? You read books
Mhm.
like uh, East of Eden, and they talk about these fruit pickers who basically the company, quote unquote, pays
Right.
for
Yeah.
everything.
Right.
But
That
then
scene
you're
where like the guys from Alabama, when they like first arrive
Mhm.
and they're talking to like the boss or whatever, that scene is just like it pisses me off, just
It's
like
so angry.
how he breaks down the fact that basically like they are working, they're basically like sacrificing like their body and essentially and possibly their lives for pay that can only be used to buy stuff that is owned by the company that they work for. So they're forever like indebted to like this horrible like sort of like circuitous economy
Mhm.
uh within like these companies. Again, if Amazon if Amazon, if the company of Amazon had it their way, that's what they would do too. They would like
100%.
give like they would give like Amazon.com credit to pay
Yeah.
for to give to their employees and not actual money. Right? Like so and again, like thanks to the struggles of all these people early on, that thankfully is not the case. But yeah, that scene is so aggravating. And of course, like in that scene, James Earl Jones, he speaks up and he's like, he asks a good question, like what how do we know you're not going to like raise the prices on your
Mhm.
goods?
They're like, oh, the company would never do that. It's so
Yeah.
wild that not only are they starting them indebted because they're forced to pay for all this equipment that they're loaning out to them. So they're already starting them
Yeah.
in debt, and then they have to live in their houses and they have to buy everything from their
Yeah,
stores. They're not
they
allowed to
don't own
buy anything.
anything. They basically don't own anything. Like they don't
They're
even own like their
slaves.
time. Yeah, they're slaves. Yeah.
No.
Pretty much.
And,
Yeah.
and then on top of that, too, is they're not even paid in real money. They're paid in a fake company currency
Yeah.
in which that is completely
Script.
useless outside of that
Yeah.
one town. It's it's wildly insane that this was ever allowed to happen in American history. Like just the
Yeah.
fact that only 100 years ago there were still people who weren't paid in money, but merely in these arbitrary currencies that only worked in this small town, and it's an indentured servant. It's really
Yeah, it is.
not
Yeah,
that
it's
far from
no different than
slavery.
slavery.
No.
Yeah, it really is not. No, yeah, and it's extremely sad, and yeah. So you're, I mean, like, yeah, when they strike and when they fight back, you can't help but feel, happy, that they're fighting against like this horrible, like, coal mining company or whatever. It's really quite satisfying when they, strike and, come together. That's really what's awesome. When they call all the workers like come together and, I think what there's like the line of like, all we got is our misery, so we might as well share it. Like I think it's
Hmm.
like the narration, like quoting like some other person, So, and that's kind of like, yeah, like the crux of the movie. Even though everybody's miserable, so we might as well like come together and share it, and then hopefully get better conditions into the future. Yeah, movies like this and stories like this, there's not enough of them, I don't think.
No, not in, I mean, when's the last time you saw a new
Yeah.
film about a labor strike or about
Well,
labor in general?
I've never seen it, but I think you've seen it. There's that one movie.
You get to be a little more specific.
It's the movie directed by Boots Riley,
Oh,
the rapper. Sorry to Bother You. Isn't that like kind of like a movie about labor?
yeah, that's true. Sorry to bother you is,
I've never seen it, but I
but
believe that's the case.
it it is, but it's not a movie about, it's definitely about capitalism and how evil it is. And it's a bit
Yeah,
about labor and there's some labor
yeah.
undertones, but there's no sort of, I guess it's more
That,
about,
yeah.
Sorry to Bother You is more about the black experience of slavery
Mhm.
and then the more modern version of slavery than
Right.
sort of the unionization and labor in general. So
Yeah.
I
That's
guess it is,
still
but
that's
it's more
still
specific.
right. That's still more that's still
But that's still
on
more.
that's at least more on the wavelength
Yes,
of probably
absolutely.
Matewan than any other, major released movie probably at this point. I should watch it, but yeah, yeah, again, like it's just like there's not enough of it. I think, you made the comparison, of course, with Schrader's is Blue
Blue
Collar.
collar.
Obviously that those movies are very similar. Um, Especially like the way that like the lengths that the opposition to the union and the working class will go to like there's nothing immoral that they won't do to destroy like the working class and the union and their erode their solidarity. Like the like when they use that woman to like lie about her being like
Yeah.
assaulted by the Chris Cooper character. I mean, that is like evil. Like that's diabolical to manipulate a woman and then to have everybody basically like be manipulated into like basically killing this guy for something that he didn't do. And then of course, that's a great part of the movie where it's just like it's ramping up
Oh my
and you're
God.
like, okay, okay, it's like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Oh no, it's just like you feel like something bad's gonna happen. And then James Earl Jones, there's a beautiful scene where they're like talking at
Sitting
the
at the
fire and
fire.
then they go into the woods. That's
Hmm.
a beautiful, that whole part where they're like together is like really beautiful. And then at the last second, they stop James Earl Jones from killing Chris Cooper. That whole sequence of events is just like is crazy.
Yeah, it's just horrific the things that people are willing to do. Not even because of the money necessarily, but merely the idea. They have to crush the very idea of
Right. Like
unions.
they
I
have
mean,
to
the
they have to
very,
erode the solidarity. Yeah.
yeah, it's, and I think of in Blue Collar, the haunting thing, I would argue Blue Collar has a darker ending than this film does, although both
Mhm.
endings are pretty dark. But you could argue at least with
This ending is pretty
this,
dark.
they're at least fighting back. They're trying to win. Whereas in Blue Collar, the
Hmm.
tragedy of that film is in the end, the very workers that are trying to create a union end up
Yeah.
becoming scabs because they are convinced that that is the only way that they can work in the system, that the only
Right.
way that they can try to beat the
Hmm.
people at the top is to climb themselves to the top. And you can argue that
Right.
that's even a little more tragic because the
That
only
is
way to
super
beat the system
tragic. Yeah.
is to be part of it. Where at least these people, even though it ends in the death of a lot of good people, is at least
Right.
they're fighting against it.
They
And
never stopped. Yeah, they never ever stopped like being. They never stopped. They never became scabs in the end.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right. Like no one ever was like, I'm scabbing. Like I can't do it. Although there is like although I will say like there's at the end like where Bruce Cooper talks to Danny and his friend got killed, right? Like
Hmm.
they like slit his throat like a dog, which is, terrible, that
Jesus
whole
Christ.
scene. And like Danny's talking to the Chris Cooper character, Joe is his name. And Danny's the young kid. He asked Joe, he's like, he basically they had that conversation where he's basically like, we can only look out for ourselves. You know what I mean? Like the union, he's basically like in the whole movie, like Danny is like a very like wide-eyed like character in terms of like he's super, and there's that interesting distinction, right, that I want to bring up. Like Danny and his mother, like
Hmm.
Danny's mother is completely like, because I think her husband or whatever got killed,
I
who was a
believe, yeah.
worker. She's completely beside herself with like union activity. Like she doesn't believe in it really. Like
Yep.
she's kind of done with it. But her son, is the opposite. He's totally for it. He preaches about it at church. He is 100% about it. And then it's super tragic at the end when his friend gets killed, and he's basically like he becomes like kind of cynical like his mom, right? And he instead goes against Joe's like idea to not use violence, not use guns or anything like that. But instead, Danny's like, no, we have to get our revenge, which is sad.
And what's terrible is that, which Joe is right, that they want them to use violence because violence is the excuse that they
Right.
need. Because they're, as he points out, you're
Yeah.
not just fighting the company, you are fighting the nation. The United States
Yeah.
government
You're fighting, yeah,
did
everybody.
and does protect the rich. They always have, and they will continue to until someone
Or at least like
actually does
property.
something.
They're
They
all
love
about protecting
property.
property. That's what police are
Absolutely.
for. That's what the FBI for. Yeah.
And he points out that the moment you bring guns in, that's just an excuse for them to bring in the National Guard
Right.
or the
He's right. Yeah.
military. And
Mhm.
it's it's so infuriating because the people at the top, the rich people, the company, they're allowed to use any tactic possible, and there is no consequences for what they do.
Right. Yeah.
Everything that anyone in the union does, so much thought has to be put into it. I mean, there's that scene where they
Mhm.
talk about they all meet together, three groups without Joe, because they're like, we have to kill somebody. Like we have to start shooting. We can't keep doing
Yeah.
this. Which of course is led by who we don't know yet, our evil villain, the one who the traitor who switches sides.
Yeah. That guy.
Such an evil human being.
That guy's guilty. Yeah.
And he's talking about, we got to go do this. We got to go kill these people. And James Earl Jones is like, are we killing white people? And they're like, yeah, you're going to be shooting white people. And he's like, whenever black people shoot white people, there's always going to be trouble. Because
Yeah.
there's no way for them to, and James Earl Jones recognizes this, right? These people recognize that whatever they do is going to be seen by the world. Like there is nothing that they can do that is ever going to be seen as right. They're always going to be put on the wrong side of history. And they're sort
Yeah.
of stuck between this rock and this hard place where
Mhm.
every decision that they make is the wrong decision, no matter what decision that they do. And they're in this really
Yeah.
tough spot where they need to care about their local community and they need to care about the people there. But they're also, which they keep pointing out to Joe, and I understand this friction between the citizens and Joe is trying to create a national movement because he needs
Yeah. He's
a
he's
whole
an ex
wide,
wob he's an ex wobbly, right? Like, which is
yep.
the one big union thing. So he's all about that stuff, and he keeps like being accused of being like a red or a communist as well. And yeah.
But you can see it both ways. On the one hand, Joe's right. One for all and all for one. We need to do what's best for the entire union because if the entire union does well, then in the end, right, the company can't fight back. But if we only care about the whole union, we don't care about our local community, the sacrifice may be the community in and of itself. So
Yeah.
how do we do both? How do we do what's best for the union as a
Right.
whole, but also for us? And that
Yeah.
contradiction never seems to relieve itself. They're always at
Yeah.
conflict with each other, which is why Joe is such an interesting character in this piece and his own conflict because
Hmm.
when he comes there, he's there for the union and
Yeah.
you can see the parallels between what he's doing and what the company men are doing because they are bureaucrats who are working for right
Yeah.
this higher organization. And Joe's conflict is on the one end, he wants to help these local people, he sees them, he becomes friends with them. He lives in tents outside of
Yeah.
town with them. But on the other hand, he believes that this is part of a bigger movement. And he doesn't know how to fit those two things together.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone knows how to fit those two things together because every time they try anything, they're immediately attacked. Like there's no one
Yeah.
ever on their side. The only upside of this whole thing, I guess, is the fact that neither the sheriff nor the mayor, which is insane, never give in. Like they
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
refuse.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because they kind of like bait you because like you think like oh, which is but that police chief is a real person by the way. See, Sid, Hatfield,
Okay.
real guy. Yeah, they kind of like bait you into thinking that he's gonna be like oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's the police chief. Of course, he's gonna be like on the side of the company and of
Yeah.
property or whatever. But then the movie progresses and you realize like oh, he's the opposite. He actually like is protecting because at one point like the detective agency they start to like kick people out of their homes, like
Mm-hmm.
evict people out of their homes or whatever. And Sid Hatfield is like, you need like no, like you need like proper identification for this.
Mm-hmm.
And he stands his ground, you know, like and these are mean motherfuckers. So he stands his ground and then they walk away. And then of course that basically comes around to the end of the movie, which prompts the massacre, right? Because they come back, they even bring a bigger group of guys
Mm-hmm.
to go and do the evictions to evict people. And then Hatfield is there, and he's like, "You're not coming through. You know, you can't do it. You don't have the right to." And then he shoots them in the head. He kills like all of them. And yeah, that's a great character, and that's a great unusual kind of a turn that you weren't expecting, where the police chief is actually like
A
doing his
good
job.
guy.
Yeah.
It is very refreshing to see someone in law enforcement in a film that
Yeah.
is actually doing the
Yeah.
thing that he is paid to do, is actually protecting the citizens of his community instead of being part of some larger conspiracy, which is unfortunately more often than not the case. The fact of the matter is a lot of these people are pulled by, and I understand the appeal. I mean, that candy shop scene where it's the mayor, the sheriff, and these two men, their will to refuse and the companymen point out that you're gonna lose. There is no winning here
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So why not do something better for yourself? Why not do something that betters your family? And I understand that argument. And I understand that is such an impossible place to be put in because you can even, I mean, I can feel myself being in that position and being pulled in both directions, even though you want to fight for the union and you know that's the right thing to do, but then you also
Yeah.
think about
Mhm.
but what's the point? Am I just going to end up dead anyways? Or am I just going to end up in the exact same place that I was before? Why not take something that will do something in the future? I mean, if there's nothing that we can do, which exactly what happens at the end of Blue Collar is he comes to the realization that there is no fighting, there is no winning. No matter what we do, we're always going to be in the same
Mhm.
place. So might as well take the benefits when I can get them, and then once I move
Yeah.
up the ladder, then I'll do something. But of course,
Right. But that's
that's
just
every
like that's
company
what they
man.
want. That's what they want you to do, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what the company wants you to do into thinking that like but you'll always be like under their boot at the end of the day. That's what they want you to feel defeated. They want you to feel like the only way to, you know, alleviate your conditions is to just like keep working, you know, like don't ask for any but don't ask for anything more, you know, don't ask for anything don't ask for more stuff because you will face our wrath. So yeah, I mean, and it's so like, and the companies too, like, and companies to this day, right? Like, they have to like hire this like private detective agency, you know, like to do their
Mhm.
bidding, right? Which I think is really evil, like the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, which is basically just like the Pinkertons. Like, it's
Yeah.
basically the Pinkertons. Like it's just like it's basically just like a group of like they're not like deputized. They're barely deputized. Like of just like they're basically just like threatening people with guns,
Yes. They're
and
criminals, basically.
they're criminals. Yeah, they're like criminals that are being hired by the company to do. And yeah, all the stuff with them, like when they go into the camp, and then they that's a great scene where they go into the camp and they I think they ask for their script back from like
Hmm.
the women and children who were there, and they're like super threatening to the women and children. And then the hillbillies like come out of the woods and they stop them. They keep on
The
getting
hill people.
stopped. The hill people, yeah, yeah. Like I love that scene. That scene is really funny. And yeah, they're just defeated by like they keep on getting defeated. Like something happens and they're like, oh, let's go, and they leave. Yeah, that's it. I just love that scene. I just love when they are defeated by the hillbillies. It's very funny.
Those moments of satisfaction where there's some sort of defeat feel
Uh-huh.
so good and so
Yeah.
thrilling, and you just feel so happy. But those moments are also so fleeting, and the moment
Yeah.
that something good happens, immediately, almost the very next scene, something
Hmm.
significantly worse happens, and it feels like every win comes with this bigger loss, or every step forward
Yeah.
is two steps back, and you just get beaten down by this film, and by the end you're just so angry, and you get Joe, and you want to be on his side, and you're like, yeah, we shouldn't shoot people, we should go this. But by the end, when the sheriff pulls out his two
Yeah.
guns and starts shooting, a part of you is cheering. I mean, a part of you is excited that
Yeah.
these
But
fuckers
then
are
I
finally
know
gonna
like
die.
that and that scene is exciting, but then you have like the after the shooting where Mary
Hmm.
McDonald like cries over which cries over Joe's body, which by the way, I think this is the first movie that Chris Cooper and Mary McDonald were ever in, which is kind of
Really?
nuts. Like Chris Cooper, he's a pretty famous guy, and this is the first movie that he ever appeared in. He did theater before that.
That's
And he was
wild.
recruited for this movie. And I mean, he's in a bunch of movies.
He's in a
And
ton of movies.
Mary McDonald's in a bunch of movies too, but I remember her most fondly as she plays like the president in like Battlestar Galactica, like the new series.
Yeah.
So I just remember her most fondly from that. And she's good. She's very, very good in this movie. Will Oldham is also in it, which is very crazy to see him in this movie so young at 15 years old. He's like most famous for being like the singer-songwriter. He's most famous for his singer-songwriter project, Bonnie Prince Billy. And he lives in Louisville. I'll see him around
Really?
sometimes.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he's from here. In the featurette, have you ever listened to his music or anything like that?
I don't think so. What
No.
kind of
Okay.
is
Well,
he?
he's just like a singer songwriter, guitar player guy.
Okay.
He's made like many, many, many albums. But I guess he was like in the Louisville Actors Theater at 15 years old, and they like found him there, which is kind of weird.
Wow. Was this
And he's
shot in West
acted.
Virginia? It had to be.
It was shot in
Okay,
West
it looks like
Virginia,
West
but not
Virginia
in Matewan. They found another. They
town.
they didn't think Matewan looked as picturesque as this town did. It's another town in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And it is a good location. But yeah, like 15 years old, they like found him at the theater there, and and he's acted in other movies. He's really good in the Kelly Reichardt movie Old Joy.
Hmm.
That he's awesome in that movie. But he's most famous for his music. That's really what he mainly does, and he's very good in the movie. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of incredible performances here. And I think whenever you see James Earl Jones, he really does kind of
Yeah, he's
steal the
great.
show. It's hard to for anyone to just live up to.
He's got a gravitas.
He does. There's just something about him. I mean, it's not as if he's giving this Oscar-worthy performance where he's got these big emotions, but there's something in the smallness of his emotions and just his weight on screen, just the way he's able to carry an entire scene is really incredible. And I almost wish I could see more of James Earl Jones in this movie because every time you see him, you're just so excited that he's on the screen. And I think of that moment where it's him and Chris Cooper sitting at the fire and he's about to kill him. And so he has like these
Yeah,
weird conflicting emotions going on where on the one end he thinks Joe is this nice guy, but then also
yeah,
he's just been told that Joe is a rapist.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so he doesn't know how to feel at this moment. This person has been helping them all along, but now suddenly he sees them as this different light and you see him walking out into the woods and contemplating that. And then the great sound design of hearing the footsteps and the
hmm
heavy breathing right before it's about to happen. And you think, oh shit, this is it. And of course, at the very last second, which
yeah, yeah. He's stopped.
that church scene, oh my
Yeah,
God.
that church scene is really good because when he's like when they find him like listening in on him and he's like, did I tell you when he's like talks about how I got this medal, like how he got his World War I medal, like that's a great scene. And then they're in the church, right? And they're being and the Pinkerton guys or whatever are being like loud and they're being drunk or whatever. And he sort of has to the Danny he has to he's given this sermon and he's able to subliminally send a message right to the other guys about the fact that like he didn't do anything wrong. Joe didn't do anything wrong.
What is
Great scene. Yeah, the whole sequence, like I said, is like very, very, very good. Because you're just like, oh no, it's getting like, it's mounting, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And then that guy gets away, the the spy, right?
Hmm.
That spy, he gets away, and you're like, dang it, he got away. Like he's like sets a fire, right? Like that, it's just like, yeah, just these people, like these labor, these strike breakers, like they're evil. There's nothing that they won't do, right? Like it's pretty terrible.
And I think of that moment, which arguably is one of the most satisfying moments in the film, because the whole film, I'm thinking this company man, he's got to die. I mean, he's just Kevin Ty. He's so evil that this movie
You
just
mean the spy?
no, not the spy.
Oh, okay. Oh,
No, the
you're talking about the Kevin T character.
yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah, that guy
Kevin
is
T.
pretty
Yeah,
bad. Yeah, yeah. When she fucking shoots him with the shotgun. Yeah, very
it's
very
fucking
satisfying.
awesome.
Yeah, very great. Yeah, but again, of course, it's precipitated again with this very like, well,
Yes.
it's sort of it ends with this very like, it ends with that very sad moment of just like her crying and stuff, and it's just
Yeah,
like, this sucks. Again, I don't think Joe was a real person, but it's still very sad.
yeah. I mean, I'm
But
sure Joe was more of a conglomeration of a
right, yeah,
variety of
yeah,
different people who
of like people from
worked
like
for
the
the
United Mine
union.
Workers or whatever. And again, sales. I think he's a great writer. He's a good film director, but I think he's a
Hmm.
great, great, great writer. Like I think his writing
Yeah,
in this is like just again and again and again really, really good. Like he gives everybody like really great lines and then monologues, and he really gives like people like things to do in the movie. I was really quite impressed with that part.
yeah, and I think why his writing works so well is it never at any point feels as if there are characters in this film who merely exist
Yeah.
for our
Hmm.
protagonists or antagonists to talk to. Every single person in this film has their own wants and desires. And even when they're on the same side, they are conflicting. I mean, we have the conflicting ideas of people like James Earl Jones and some of the other union workers. And even though in some ways they're on the same side, but of course, the very first time we meet James Earl Jones, the
Yeah.
right, they get
He's
off the
attacked
train and they're
because they're
they're
scabs.
attacked. They're
Yeah.
they're attacked for being scabs. They're attacked for the color of their skin,
Right.
and so they're in this very particular position where James Earl Jones men, right, the people part of his crew,
Yeah, the black people from Alabama.
they are they're scabs, right? But they're also
Right.
they're in debt to the company. Like they
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
much
Yeah. The situation is bad, and they wanted to improve as well.
I think that's why the writing works so well is everyone has their own specific wants and desires which conflict with each other even if they're on the same side, even if they're all towards the same goal. And even Joe himself, he isn't this perfect person. He's not put on this holy grail. I mean, he's not what some of them think he is. He's certainly not a rapist,
Yeah.
but he has his problems, and they point out he is part of a larger bureaucracy. One of them points out, what's the difference between listening to you and listening to Company Man? We're just listening, right? People are just telling us what to do. What does it matter which people are? And that's a good point, which is even if you're not listening to the company, you're still listening to the union, which is telling you what you do, and they decide how much money you get, and they decide how much
Mhm.
food you get. You still have no say, even though union's supposed to be a democracy. You're still when the democracy is over an entire nation, right? The entire nation can decide what your town does. And so there is this
Yeah.
sense that there's nothing that they can do. They don't have free will, as if everything has been written in the stars, right? It's fate, it's destiny. They have no control of what they're doing. And you see them throughout this film trying to take back that control. And every time they try to take that
Yeah.
control, chaos ensues.
Yeah, and I think too, like the sales still add some like really great like details and stuff, like the great detail of like the Italian immigrant mother like connecting with the old woman or whatever, right? Over
Yeah.
like at the beginning of the movie, they hate each other or whatever, and then as time goes along, they realize that okay, like this is a situation that we're both in, we're not all that different, like maybe we should help each other instead, because being angry at each other is not, a lot of people could take, a fucking, clue, as to, that like, like maybe that person that's, it's, it is a very basic stuff, like, treat people with respect, even if they're like different from you, right? Like that's just very
Mhm.
basic stuff. But, again, Americans, they don't really like that. Um, But again, with because of that class solidarity, discrepancies or feelings that you might have for a certain type of person, I think that can be eroded, through that solidarity. Yeah, little details like that really like come through, like the sales. And again, I just feel like he just gives everybody something to do, Everybody just kind of has their own little thing, their own little, way of like doing their thing. And I think it seems like he's really good with working with actors. It seems like it seems
Hmm.
like actors really kind of are, and which is why he probably did a good thing hiring Wexler to shoot it, right? Because I
Yeah.
don't think he's like that kind of guy. Like I don't think he's like a cinematographer guy, right? I mean, that's a job of a
No.
cinematographer.
Yeah.
But he did a good job picking him because again, I just love the way that the movie looks. You get like great oranges, you get great greens. It kind of has this almost like foggy sepia tone to it, but it's not sepia tone, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's almost kind of has like this nostalgia kind of thing, but not
Yeah.
really. Like it's not romantic, but it's not too romantic. Like it's kind of on this like precipice where it feels like we did go back in time. Like it really
Hmm.
feels like we went in a time machine and went back in time and we're sort of kind of like in this idealistic like past, but it's also not idealistic, right? Because it's still like, it's everything is still kind of down in the dumps. So I feel like they shoot it perfectly, like pitch perfectly, to kind of like the tone of the story. Yeah, and I mean it's and the location helps with that as well. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, that puts us just about an hour. Should we give our final
Okay.
thoughts? I
I guess
mean,
it went by fast.
you were kind of, yeah, I know. We had a lot to talk about, a lot to say. There's a
Yeah.
lot to say about this
Well,
movie.
I'll just say, I'll just like conclude with that, with just saying like, yeah, like great cast, great writing, great acting from everybody involved. Obviously, like I just said, it's perfectly shot and it looks perfect. And yeah, but ultimately, I think like the story, any story that kind of like focuses deeply on like on a piece of like labor history in the United States, a piece of violent labor history, I mean, I think it's a home run, I think there's not enough movies about it, there's not enough like media about it. I think people have been sort of, made to forget these things for obvious reasons. And so I think any kind of movie like this that can be propped up in order to sort of once again sort of drill in the fact that unions and labor solidarity and things like that are good and they can be beneficial to the world and to individual people. I think that is always well worth the time and effort. So I'm gonna give it like a 9 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah, it's frustrating that this film and films like this are so few and far between. And even this film itself, I had some struggle finding the film because it wasn't publicly available on any streaming service. And we've it not only have we buried the history, but we've even buried the art that has come from this history.
Yeah, this movie didn't do well. Like it didn't make very much money when it came out, even though it was very cheaply made.
It's so frustrating as a teacher to exist in this world where these kids are told that this is how the world exists and to work in these different socioeconomic classrooms
Yeah,
because as a substitute I've worked for very wealthy schools and schools that really struggle even in the same communities, even in the same counties, and they are all ingrained in their brains that this is how the world works and this is the
right.
life that you should expect and these are the things that you're going to do. You're going
Don't
to
ask for
drop out of high
anything
school.
more.
Don't ask for anything more. You're going to go get a factory job. You're going to make $20 an hour for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
And you should be happy. You should be grateful that we have given you this
yeah,
opportunity. And anything more you ask for is just illegitimate and you should just let it go because if you don't succeed in this one very specific environment, then you are not worthy of doing anything other than right the lowest of jobs in which we pay you as low as physically possible. And last year I would work with these kids that would think that $20 an hour was the greatest amount of money you could ever make. It was this extreme amount of money. And here in Nevada,
yeah,
where the living wage is twice as much as it is in the Midwest, just because everything's just a lot more expensive. I mean,
right.
a, a dozen eggs is $3. A gallon of gas is $4.50. It's obnoxiously expensive to live here, and on $20 an hour, you can barely make it by. And they think that they can because they live with their parents and they don't pay for insurance. They don't worry about any of these other things. And they don't realize that $20 an hour seems fine now, but what happens in 10 years when you're still making $20 an hour and now your back hurts and your whole body aches because you've been doing this physical labor since you were 16 years old and you got another 50 years of this because you don't have enough money to save for retirement. You don't have anything that you can do in the future. And films like this try to fight that. They try to show you that there is another way, that the problem isn't that we have these different jobs. The problem isn't that you become a coal miner and you
Mhm.
become the CEO of this tech company. The problem is that we've created this idea that for some reason the person who works in the coal mine, which is interesting they live in Nevada because there's still plenty of coal miners here in Nevada, which is wild because
Mhm.
it's one of the most dangerous still and obnoxiously scary jobs to have ever existed in humankind. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's ridiculous.
you're walking into caves because human labor is still the best way to get coal and we still use
Yeah.
coal. I mean, it's still an evil. I mean, the people who do it are quote unquote paid well. I mean, they you make a lot of money doing it, but no one can do it for a long period of time because it's an incredibly dangerous job and people die from it still
Yeah.
all of the time. And it's just insane that the people who are given some of the hardest jobs in the world are cared about the least and paid the least. And people who have these cushy jobs where they work from home and they just sit on their computer all day are paid millions of dollars, even though their job is significantly easier and anyone could do their job. Where I argue
Mhm.
you have to be a very specific person to be able to work in a coal mine or to do these factory type jobs. And it's frustrating that there aren't enough films like this. And even this film itself is hard to find. But I love this film. I love it so much. It looks so beautiful. It's so green. The West Virginia location is just gorgeous. I've only
Yeah, it's
been
great.
to West Virginia one per time, but I think West Virginia is one of the most beautiful places in the United States. It's
I should
just
go there. Never been. It's
you
not too far
should.
from
I
me.
mean, you're not too far away. You're like what, six, seven
No,
hours maybe? It's
maybe. Yeah.
I honestly think, I mean, me and Brandon have driven across the country a couple of different times, and in my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful places in the country. And what's crazy about West Virginia is so few people live there. There's very little infrastructure there, other than the capital. There's only these tiny little towns. There's not a lot of people there, so it's almost like you're back in the wilderness. It's almost as if you
Yeah.
travel through time, which is why I think it helps that this film was shot in West Virginia because you can so quickly just be convinced, like, oh, this really does feel like 1920s West
Yeah.
Virginia. It doesn't feel as if we are on a set. These all feel like real locations in real places. And as I said, James Earl Jones just really steals the show. But then you think about it, you're like, well, Chris Cooper's incredible, Kevin Teague is incredible, and you just go down the list, and you're like, no wait, this person's amazing, this person's amazing, this person's amazing.
Yep.
Everyone just gives this incredible performance, and they're just given these great lines of dialogue, and it just looks absolutely beautiful, and everything about the film is just wonderful and amazing, and you just love every second of it. So I too am
Great
gonna give
movie.
this film a 9
Yeah.
out of 10.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, that's the movies. You
That's
can find
movies.
you can find everything I do at Austin Lugo,
I'm on Letterboxd at Retro Ranger, RETR0 Andrew.
and you can find this podcast where your podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. With nothing to say, thank you all for listening.